The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. This is Paul Ragusa, editor with Security Systems News. Welcome to another edition of Leadership Talks. I'm very excited to have Kim Loy, Director of Technology and Communications for Vanderbilt Industries. Hi, Kim. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Paul. Nice to be here.
So, Kim, I thought before we jump into the questions, can you just give us a minute on Vanderbilt, the company itself?
Absolutely. Vanderbilt was formed in 2012 by an acquisition, part of Ingersoll Rand that had the access control business. And then again in 2015, internationally, we acquired Siemens Security Products business to form the Vanderbilt International. Vanderbilt is a part of Acre, which is our parent company, which also owns another company called ComNet, which does transmission equipment and stuff. So our U.S. headquarters is in New Jersey, and we are based, our headquarters is in Germany internationally. However, our center of excellence, where all of our engineering, marketing, and other staff are, is in Dublin, Ireland, where I am currently located.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Now, I thought, we spoke about this at ISC West, and this is, on the top of everyone's mind right now. 4 letters in GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which I know went into effect, is enforceable as of May 25th. Can we start with that? Maybe give us a bird's eye view of the GDPR, and then we'll get into some of the new expectations that are in place for manufacturers, integrators. So let's start with just a big picture on GDPR. What's your take on that, Kim?
Sure. So as you said, GDPR came into effect on May 25th. In general, it's a legal framework put in place by the European Union that sets guidelines for collection and processing of personal information of individuals within the European Union. It impacts any company that does business there. So it's not just companies located in Europe that need to be aware of the guidelines set by GDPR. Any business, whether it's an American-based business or elsewhere, if you do business in Europe or ship your equipment to Europe, you need to be aware of GDPR and what's required for both manufacturers, integrators, and end users. It has an impact across the board.
Yeah, it really does, and I'm not sure everyone in the industry is quite up on this. So let's get into it a little bit. How about we'll start with manufacturers. What expectations are now in place for them? What do they need to be aware of with this?
Right. So we've done a lot. Vanderbilt has already done a lot. So from a manufacturing point of view, we've run audits on all of our products in terms of the functionality. As a manufacturer, for the most part, Vanderbilt has intrusion and access control systems as our 2 core product lines. We don't generally store personal information. All of our products have database functionality, but as everyone's aware, those databases get shipped empty. There's no information in them. And then it's up to the integrator to install them. However, there are things in GDPR like it's the right to be forgotten is a standard in GDPR. So one of the things that we did with our products, just in an effort to also help with our integrators to comply with GDPR, is made sure that you can easily purge information from the database. For instance, some people might not consider the fact that when an employee leaves an organization, generally in an access control system, for an example, you would delete them, take away their cards, rights, delete their card holder and their information. But with GDPR, you have to go further than that. You actually need to be able to delete the log files that would show any transactions from that person coming and going from the facility, entering and leaving. So we did do, you were always able to do that with our products, but we made it easier and more user intuitive so that they can easily find that. So if an employee does leave and they have to get rid of that information, we made some very minor changes to the products to ensure that the integrators would know how to do that, but also that the end users could easily purge that information from their systems. So, again, for manufacturers, there is an impact. There's an impact across all businesses, not only with the production of new products and stuff. Anybody that does marketing has a obligation. So if you have people signing up for newsletters on your website, and actually the newsletter databases that we have, you have to do double opt-ins. You have to give the people the opportunity to be taken off the list and have their information deleted. So when you start looking at it outside of the product point of view and start looking at it from a marketing point of view, the impact is even greater in terms of how it impacts everybody the same way and how you collect information on your website and other communications. So it gets into areas that not everyone, I think, would think about. We're very, very conscious of it being, the international part of our business being right in Europe. We need to make sure that we comply.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up about how far-reaching this is, and I'm sure several listeners will agree. I've been getting a lot of emails leading up to the 25th about exactly what you were saying, opt-ins and those type of things. So how about for integrators? I know you talked a little bit about what this means for integrators and how you're working with them to help them be in compliance. What are some of the things integrators need to think about?
Yeah, so integrators, in terms of, I mean, they generally have more interaction with the system, post installation. In terms of many times they provide technical support by, remoting into a system, and so they just have to be very cautious that they're not interacting with the end user information that might be in that system. And it's important that the integrators, with help from the manufacturer, but because they have that direct relationship with the end user, educate the end users in how the systems work and how the end user can be compliant with GDPR. As one example, if I put myself as the end user in the situation, in our company, our human resources department had to send out notice to all of our employees. So it's, to let us know what information they have. And even in that case, as an employee, you have the right to be forgotten if there's information that you don't want them to store. So, from an end user perspective, the integrators have a lot of education to do. Between the manufacturer and the integrators, we have put together a data processing agreement in place that says the systems that we sell them will be used for data processing, but that we don't have any access to the user information that's stored there. So it's a lot of education. And if integrators aren't interacting with that end user data, then it's just the ability to train the end users on how they can purge data when they need to.
Yeah, it's good that you are helping in that education process for the integrators. Was there more that you wanted to add about working with the integrator community on this?
Well, we did add to our products. We have put buttons like right on the home screens of most of the products that where the integrator can actually link to their data privacy and things like that. So in addition to the functionality, we allow the integrator to put their data privacy contracts or documents so that it's readily available to the end users that are using the products. But it's it's something that will grow over time. GDPR has some pretty detailed guidelines in what you need to do. However, it's still early days, and I expect that it will evolve over time. There's no GDPR logo that you can put a stamp on something and say we are GDPR compliant. You can just, to the best of your ability, meet the guidelines that they have in place, and there's lengthy documentation on the GDPR website, but it's not a set standard where you can literally say we passed a test and now we're GDPR compliant. So it's to the best of our ability to interpret that. We at Vanderbilt have hired a data protection officer to kind of guide us through the process that has looked at all of the audits we've done on our products and really assisted in making sure that we're doing all the things that we can do to make that we're in line with GDPR. And again, as part of GDPR, every company in the EU is required to have a data protection officer. So that was one of the first things we did a little over a year ago to make sure that we were adapting our marketing, our products, and our interactions with our customers in the right way.
That's good to know. That's a good bit of information there. Now, you mentioned a word in there, compliance, and then that's obviously probably top of everyone's mind with this. Who is responsible, for the compliance? Is that on an individual basis? Can you talk a little bit about the compliance topic there, and how that's achieved? Who's responsible?
Sure. So it's a kind of a broad answer because to a certain extent, all businesses are parties with access to personal information. Whether it's your employees' personal information, your customers' personal information, the end user's personal information. We all have the same duty to make sure that that information is held properly and with the consent of the person whose information you're storing. So at all levels, from the manufacturer, our salespeople keeping personal information on even their salespeople. Salespeople may have their customer information that says, the wife's name is, and they have 4 kids and all of that. If the customer doesn't want us to store that information, they have to have the opportunity to opt out. So it reaches really across all businesses, whether it's B2B or B2C. I think that, we're a B2B business, and so we've done a lot of work to make sure that we're complying with it. I think B2C businesses, and the ones that come up most often if you go through GDPR training, as an example, would be cell phone providers, a Verizon or an AT&T that have a lot of personal information on their customers, have to be even more diligent in terms of how they store that and to make sure that they have the consent. Probably everybody on this call and everybody everywhere has been getting inundated with emails from everybody from, where you do your online shopping, Amazon, anyone that you do business with sending you an email saying that you need to check your preferences and sort of opt back in. And if you don't respond, you'll no longer get emails from them. So it really reaches across. Everybody has a certain amount of responsibility to make sure that they're using personal information in the right way and with consent.
Okay, that's good. And then how about cloud and the storage of data in the cloud? Are there specific guidelines there?
So they're not specific. If you read through the guidelines for GDPR, there's not a section that says if you had cloud-based solutions or products versus an on-premise solution. However, we ran our cloud-based solutions just through the same audit that we did for our traditional on-premise systems, just in terms of how we store the information. And in that case, what we have done is, because if somebody buys our access control and video platform, that's a cloud-based platform, that information and their card holders and the database information is stored on the cloud. We have now put in a system whereby we can no longer access that information at all without the permission of the customer, and then there's an actual process that we have to go through to gain information. If there's some technical support issue that we need to do, more likely it would be our integrators and dealers that would need to access that information for us. But we did a very rigorous audit in terms of what information could we possibly get access to, whether we should have access to that information, and then safeguarding against anyone being able to actually get in there and look at that information. So those are some of the changes that we put into our products immediately that have been in place now for the better part of a year, just knowing that GDPR was coming, to make sure that we were designing our cloud-based products in line with what GDPR required from us.
Okay, good. And looking more big picture here, what does this mean for the security industry as a whole? Obviously a lot of companies do business overseas or globally, and can you talk a little bit about what this could mean for the industry as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said earlier, it really doesn't matter whether your main headquarters is based in Europe or not. We've certainly, we have our US-based company with a different set of products in access control, and we're looking at all of the same things for them as well, because those products do ship to Europe. So if you're doing business in Europe at all, which most big manufacturers in the US do ship outside of the boundaries of the United States and are doing business in other parts of the world, if that's the case, the same rules apply to them. I mean, they would have the same fines put on them that you could get at being a European-based company. So it does impact the security industry as a whole, and they need to be very much aware of it. I think most companies are looking at it now, and certainly we as Vanderbilt, being a global company, regardless of whether our products are made in the US or in Europe, we're looking at them in the same way. So it will impact the whole industry, and everyone just needs to be very aware of what that means. And again, I think GDPR will start policing a lot of these systems now that May 25th has passed. So people need to be cognizant of that and where their systems are installed.
Right, and from my initial perusing of that, there seems to be some pretty steep and hefty fines, right, for those who aren't in
Yeah,
compliance.
yeah, absolutely. In the tens of thousands. It's not a slap on the hand. So yeah, they're very steep fines if you are found to be non-compliant. And I think,
Okay.
most companies need to look at the compliance as it's laid out and all of the documentation provided on GDPR in the most strictest form, because again, because there's not a checklist that you can go through that says if you check all these boxes, you're compliant. It's guidelines, and so I think you need to look at it in the strictest form to make sure that there's no loopholes that you could get caught on.
Yeah, and this gets me thinking in terms of access control. There's probably a lot of implications related to access control, and I know it's far-reaching beyond that. But can we focus a little bit specifically on access control and the data that is being collected there?
Sure, and again, I'll stress from the start that it is about access control, but it's about all security systems. Our business in Europe is actually a much stronger intrusion system business than it is an access control business. Our business in the US is access control, but we have the same diligence across those product lines because again, those products have databases where you can store information. And the use of the access control system, again, is dependent on how the end user decides to use it. But you always have personal information. You'll have, what kind of car somebody drives, maybe their license plate number, people's birthdays. In some cases, if it's combined with an HR database with your access control, you'll have social security numbers or other identifying information in there. And so you do have to be very careful with that. And companies do have to get consent even from their employees as well as their customers. So if an employee doesn't want a lot of that, they can restrict it to only what's necessary for your employer to do business with you. Now, having said that, there is a lot of information that you collect on customers, but with their consent, and you will not get in trouble with GDPR or get fined if there's a business reason for having certain information. So having information on a company so that you can invoice them because they buy product from you can never be in non-compliance with GDPR because it's required to do business with them unless either you or they sever that business relationship and ask for that information to be removed, then you have all the rights to have that information. So, but a lot of employee information or personal data that you might store that is not necessary for the business relationship, you have to have consent to store that information, whether it's your access control system, your intrusion system, or even a VMS for that matter.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Okay, and I saved this last question. I would definitely call this $1 million question here. Do you see this kind of regulation coming to the U.S. and if so, when?
Right, I absolutely think it will spread to the U.S. Having lived in Europe for 10 plus years now, I can say that the United States is, in general terms, much stronger on privacy. Because if you look at a city like London, where you can't walk through London, every square inch of London is covered by cameras. There was a time when the people from New York went to London and they were looking at putting a similar video system in New York. And if you recall, there was an outcry of people saying that was an invasion of privacy, even though the cameras were only looking at public spaces.
Yeah.
And so I think that this type of privacy protection on your data and stuff, it's going to impact US companies immediately that do business in Europe. But I think that it will be adopted actually rather quickly in the US once people catch on to what it is, and the people that are really paying attention to what's going on and start reading up on it. There will be a certain demand, I think, from the US population in general that they would like to have these same sort of privacy regulations in place.
Right, and just from your initial experiences with the North American market, do you see kind of an easy adoption on that, or do you think there'll be some people that are screaming about that? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I don't know that it'll be an easy adoption, but I think it will happen over time. I think manufacturers of products will be beginning to comply with it regardless of whether it's, legally put in place or in a position to be enforced in the U.S. Again, because many companies do overseas business. However, the smaller mom and pop shops and the small businesses that operate within their own state or a region in the United States may find it very difficult because they may have systems in place that it's not easy to quickly purge data or change things, and may have information archived for a very, very long time. I think that's probably the biggest majority of the businesses in the U.S. are the small to medium-sized businesses, and it will be difficult for them to adopt some of the strict regulations on data privacy. So I think people will want it, but I think it would take quite some time for they couldn't say they're going to give people a year to put it in place, for instance. I think it'll take much longer than that for people to actually adapt their systems and be able to do that in a cost-effective way where they can still remain in business and not be overly burdened by this type of a regulation.
Okay, great. Well, good stuff, Kim. Thank you. That's all the time we have for this session, and thanks again. And tune in, everyone, next week for another episode of Leadership Talks. And thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone who attended. Appreciate it.